So thanks for inviting me to give this keynote. I'm going to talk to you about responsible AI, not responsible technology more broadly. But I think some of the things that I'll be talking about are true for other kinds of technologies, right? And I'll bring it back to that eventually. So as Ben said, I'm a professor of responsible and interactive AI at the University of Glasgow. I'm going to be talking about the Keystone project, but I'll be talking about responsible AI more broadly. And I want to echo what Bernd has been saying about the current situation that we're in. I think it's completely in flux. We are currently on shifting sands, and these changes have been incredibly quick, right? You know, a few months, perhaps a year ago, it actually looked really, really positive, right? If you think about perhaps the same time last year, so February 2024, I think we were just about before the ratification of the EU AI Act, right? Things were looking rosy, right? You had the executive order by then President Biden. You had, you know, a real strong kind of approach within the UK. Well, within sort of pro-innovation boundaries, but as you said, it sort of started to all fall away, right? Certainly, it was really disappointing to see that the US and the UK didn't sign the Paris Agreement. We're seeing regulation being rolled back, and also tech companies strongly arguing against sort of responsible AI, right? Not all of them, but you're getting sort of that sense that there is pushback. I think what we've also been seeing is, particularly in AI, that there's just current technical advances that sort of seem to be increasing day by day. Every day there's some kind of new breakthrough. DeepSeek, everything is advancing really, really rapidly, and it is incredibly hard to keep up with these developments, especially, I think, in a university environment. Because don't forget, these tech companies, which are sometimes sponsored by states, have an enormous financial advantage to universities. They can just chuck money at it. And then we also have the interesting thing that this is not blue sky research or anything like that anymore. You get technological advances and they're implemented, right? They are hitting people in the mainstream. It doesn't take years anymore to develop a new AI system. They are there. And that creates a few problems where I'm just wondering, oh my God, are we doomed? Right? Are we heading towards another AI winter? Right? And I just wanted to give two examples of problematic areas in responsible AI. So this is no longer a system in use, but it was Amazon developing this quite a few years ago now. Which they've developed a hiring AI system because they were overwhelmed by applications to their software engineering positions, right? Seems a fairly obvious thing to do, right? Increase productivity of workers by throwing AI at it, right? And so what they did, they developed this screening program that read through the CVs, the job applications coming in, and made decisions about which ones should actually be be followed up and be invited for interviews. Well, what happened? It screened out mainly applications by women for software engineering jobs. Why was that? Well, simply put, they trained the system on the job applications they received and who they eventually hired. And even though it might not be particularly biased, the AI system quickly figured out that they could achieve a really high accuracy rate, right, by just screening out women, right? So as I said, they quickly withdrew the system, but it's just one example of these kinds of systems that might be put in place, not just in sort of an HR scenario, but perhaps in health, for diagnoses or for treatment, which can become quickly biased. Another example is this that perhaps some of you are familiar with, and that is an example of Gemini. So what happened is, if you asked it, and again they designed that out, it doesn't happen anymore. So if you asked it to provide an illustration of a 1943 German soldier, right, this is what came back. If you know your history, you will know that this is not the case. So I call these Gemini's diverse Nazis, right? Because somebody in the background actually had this idea, oh, we need to be generating diverse outputs, but clearly it doesn't make sense to have a German soldier in 1943 be an Asian woman, or a black soldier, or Billie Eilish. Right. It's true. So she wasn't there. Right. Again, it's that sort of, well, obviously somebody thought, okay, let's be inclusive, but it just didn't work, right? And actually what you're creating is output that is incorrect and potentially harmful, right? So there have been attempts to counteract that, and I just wanted to highlight the EU AI Act, because I've been very much inspired in my work by looking at it and thinking about, well, how could you actually do it, right? And it's one example. There's lots of other regulatory frameworks in place already. For example, Japan actually has very sort of forward-looking regulation around AI. China has had regulation about AI for quite a number of years. Don't know how that fits very well with responsible AI, but it has regulation. And of course, we don't in the UK, and we had some kind of regulatory framework in the US for about 5 minutes, and now it's gone again. I think it's instructive to look a little bit more at the EU AI Act and kind of go, well, what does it say and how can we perhaps align ourselves with this? What it says in essence is that all AI should be assessed as to its risks. It uses a risk-based language, but in my mind, I always say, what's the harm of it, right? It's a bit controversial. We've had lots and lots of discussions about that in our project meetings. Is it risk? Is it harm? Potato, potato, right? And then it sort of also says, well, if it's high risk, and that means AI systems that negatively affect safety or fundamental rights, right? And if you look through the list of example systems that they consider high risk, it's a long list, and literally anything interesting falls under high risk. So what you then need to do is you need to register with the EU, and you need to assess it as part of the life cycle, right? And that is actually quite interesting because, you know, that leads to the question, well, you should assess it, right, to its risks, to its potential risk, and throughout the life cycle, which to me means that, you know, usually we focus on this AI modeling and testing and evaluation bit when we do that, but actually it means we need to do that much earlier, right? When we even just designing these, right, and perhaps putting together a business case. So it really moves the onus onto a really comprehensive assessment. That doesn't just mean, oh, we ask an AI developer to assess it, but, you know, what implications do you have more broadly? So this brings me on to talking a little bit more about responsible AI. Again, we have this regulation coming from the EU that is part of the driver, I think, for responsible AI. You know, it depends on these regulatory frameworks as well, and the current climate, how important that is. But there is a certain push towards responsible AI. It's becoming a buzzword, right? Everybody is now doing AI, or they're doing responsible AI, right? Because we all want to feel good about ourselves, right? But what does it actually mean, right? And everybody I talk to, I'm going to turn this into a sort of parlor game at one point, I think, where I asked them, so, you know, mime out your definition of responsible AI, because everybody defines it slightly different. So mainly what people are talking about is accountability, transparency, and fairness. Right? Those are the sort of three big areas that everybody kind of considers as important to build this safe and trustworthy AI system, right? But there are also other dimensions of responsible AI that are usually not much talked about, but probably should be, right? And that is correctness and control. So correctness, you know, does it actually work in the application context in which you're developing, right? And you know, where do we draw the line on what is actually good, right? Quite often we do that just before we deploy and kind of go, oh, 98.9% accuracy, great, let's release it. But what does that actually mean? Right? Control is another one, and I think there's a sort of tension there where many people conflate autonomous systems with AI and agency, right? And full agency with AI. but that is not really true. And I think we need to start distinguishing how much control does somebody have over the decisions and the application of decisions of AI systems, and also how can somebody step in and actually tell AI systems that their brief has changed. How do we correct these AI systems as well? There's also a big area that's usually not talked about in AI, which is sustainability. How do we actually create systems that don't require these massive drain on resources, both in terms of energy or in terms of literally natural resources, right? Batteries, lithium, all of these things would drain resources from the environment, right? So I think there's a big push that needs to be done to bring really sustainable and environmentally responsible practices into AI. And then finally, privacy and security. I think a lot of people don't realize how much what they consider possibly private information goes into AI system. So if you have anything out publicly on the web, it's already in there. The horse has bolted. So whenever I talk to lawyers and they go, oh yes, we need to do something about IP in AI systems, I go, you're about several years too late, right? So going forward, come up with some solutions, but how do you disentangle what is already in there? So a lot of different kind of dimensions that we should really consider for AI, and I think a lot of them would also be applicable to other kinds of technology, right? And Ben already has mentioned sustainability in the sort of purview of your institute. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is the first three, mainly because I didn't want the talk to go on for too long. And also, these are the subjects that I know most about. I don't really know that much about sustainability and privacy and security. So I'm going to leave them aside and focus on accountability. So accountability first. And when it comes to definitions of these kinds of things, I usually take inspiration from the AI Act, the EU AI Act, and also the ALTAI guidelines, which sort of underlie the EU AI Act. And what they say accountability is that you have mechanisms in place to ensure responsibility for the development, deployment, and or use of AI systems. So that is what they mean by accountability. So responsible practices to develop AI, right? And that also means that what we want to do as part of these responsible practices is identify and mitigate risks in a transparent way so they can be explained to and audited by third parties. And this is where FOAM comes in. And FOAM stands for Participatory Harm Auditing Workbenches and Methodologies. And I apologize for that acronym. I'm really bad at acronyms. I tried so hard Somebody recently said, oh, we should have called it risks rather than harms. And I was like, oh, no, that would have been prawn. I don't know. In essence, what it is, it's a large keystone project funded by RAI UK. So Joel knows quite a lot about it, and various other people. Vera are involved in RAI UK as well. It's one of the keystone projects. So it was funded to roughly 3.5 million over just short of 4 years. And our idea is that we will create auditing tools and processes, these workbenches and methodologies, for people who don't actually have an AI background, so they can go and audit AI systems, right? Part of that is obviously building these tools that they can use, these processes that they can employ, but we also are looking at training them so they can do that, because they won't have the background either in AI nor auditing. So we need to do an education piece, a training piece essentially as well, and also then look, well, how does it fit into certifications? How does it fit with sort of regulatory frameworks? So the idea is, could you, for example, say, EU, I'm developing this AI system. I have done, my accountability for this by having an auditing process in place, and we're using foam. Therefore, you can be sure that, we're doing the right thing, right? So that's the sort of idea of hooking into perhaps certification and regulatory frameworks. So it's a research project to build these workbenches and methodologies. It's highly multidisciplinary. We have 7 universities involved, 25 partners. I think it might be 26 now. Again, it depends how you count it. And across the team, we have 20 academics. We will have, over the lifespan of the project, 14 postdocs, and we're going to have 5 PhD students that are integrated into the project. And then we have a bunch of affiliated PhD students as well. So, a huge team. And together, we're looking at doing user research, stakeholder research, implementation and evaluation, and of course, the training and certification piece. We're looking at 4 different use cases. So we have a use case in health, where we just finished, well, we're nearly finished looking at an AI system called SPARA, that stands for Scottish Patients at Risk of Admission and Readmission. What it does is it predicts a risk score that somebody gets admitted to an inpatient status. So through emergency, through a hospital admission within the next year. This is then passed to GPs. It is actually in use currently. It's run on a monthly basis on 80% of people living in Scotland. Right. So we are involving patients, but also GPs in auditing the performance of SPARA. We also have a few other models that we're going to investigate as part of health, but I won't talk about that. We have another use case on media content. Yes, media content, which is all about web searches and information. So we're going to work with an Italian web company We have another use case which is currently ongoing on cultural heritage. So how do, for example, museum staff, museum curators using generative AI to create metadata, to do summarizations of historical artifacts. So there's a lot of cultural connotations in it, and perhaps also some bias within that that we want to avoid. And then lastly, we're going to look at collaborative content creation, and that's where we're going to work with Wikipedia and Wikimedia to explore how AI and editors can co-write Wikipedia articles. And we're going to particularly focus on foreign languages such as Arabic and on health information on Wikipedia. Which is particularly interesting because a lot of generative AI scrapes Wikipedia on a regular basis. So we're having this sort of feedback loop. The reason we're looking particularly at Arabic, for example, is that very few editors, there are very few Arabic speaking editors. So how can we actually ensure that the information that is generated is correct? So, so we're doing a lot on putting these responsible practices into place. But there's also another slice that I wanted to talk about, which is transparency. And I've been working in explainable AI for quite a long time. So this sort of subject is very dear to my heart. And again, going to the Altai checklist, they talk about traceability, explainability, communication in a broader sense about what these AI systems are doing. And particularly the ability to explain both the technical processes of the AI system and the reasoning behind the decisions or predictions that the AI system is making. Right. So what I'm seeing there is an explosion of work in explainable AI. I think, you know, so many people are working now in explainable AI. But I think what is really high time to do is that we move away from this very technical focus of XAI to a much more multidisciplinary focus on interpretability, right? So actually, what does it mean to a human to have something explained rather than, you know, some AI developer kind of going, well, you know, I'm just chucking rules at you, right? Or showing you all of the features that matter. So what we need to do is really going back and thinking about, well, who are we trying to communicate with? Who are we trying to explain this stuff to? And what is our purpose, right, of explaining it, right? Are we, and this is one of my bugbears, I'm always seeing people, well, I'm doing explanations to improve the trust in AI. And I'm kind of going, well, maybe you want to not trust the AI that much, right? So we need to sort of figure out what we actually want to do here, right? So we need to figure out, well, what do they want to know? When do they want to know it, right? And we also need to know, well, how do we want to communicate to that, to those people, right? If you're communicating to a user that has no AI background, then you have to do that very differently to somebody who has that background, who knows about AI, who knows how it works, right? So we have to adjust how we're doing that. And that also means that we have to really know, well, what is happening when we're increasing transparency, right? How do we evaluate the effects of that? Right? And we've seen lots and lots of studies where we're finding, well, there's some good things that are happening when we have explanations, and then there might be not so good things that happen when we have explanations. So we need to be really, really clear what these are. Okay. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about fairness. So fairness, again, is sort of phrased as enabling the inclusion and the diversity throughout the entire AI system's life cycle. Right? And so what they're saying there is don't just think about it when you're doing the model, right? You need to go back to the sort of data sets. So AI systems may suffer from the inclusion of inadvertent historical bias, incompleteness, and bad governance models, right? So you're actually very likely to bake in biases and unfairness if you just reuse these data sets without thinking about what you're actually doing there. So what it can lead to, obviously, is just more injustice, prejudice, and discrimination, and therefore, you know, we need to be really careful about how we handle that, because we just perpetuate, you know, marginalization and prejudice. So what do we need to do? I think there is already some work starting to be conducted in that area on fairness identification, and well, it's not fairness mitigation, it's unfairness mitigation. But what we really need to do is start thinking about fairness beyond the technical measures that we have, right? There's 21 different ways, over 21 different ways of defining fairness from a technical perspective, right? A lot of these measures and metrics rely on measures of accuracy. So they take, for example, the true positive rate, the false positive rate. If you have a system where it's already biased, right? The true positive and the false positive won't help you very much, because you're just, you know, having a metric to compare to a biased prediction, right? Or a sort of biased ground truth data set. So I think we need to move beyond that, right? And that means that we also have to include other people other than AI developers in doing that, right? And that means that we have to design more tools and better tools and processes for fairness identification and mitigation. And in a way, foam also addresses that thing to a certain extent, right? So a lot of the work that we've been doing in foam and as part of the workshops has been on how to support people to identify harms, and fairness is one of these harms that people are coming up with, right? But we need to do that, and then we actually need to evaluate fairness in AI systems and really focus on that. And And this is a kind of a hard sell, right? Because if you're going to a company going, hey, can I evaluate your system for fairness? And they go, no, because you might find something, right? So it's really difficult to pull this off, right? Which means, and I'm going to wrap up now, you know, what does that mean for the future of responsible technology? And one of the things that I think it means is we need more carrots and we need more sticks, right? Why should a company agree to have the system evaluated as to fairness? Right? What's the carrot for them? What's the stick? Right? Currently, we're really kind of going, because you want to be responsible, nice, right? I don't know, but we need to have something ready that we can persuade them with. And if it's not a carrot, then it needs to be a stick. And currently in the UK, we have no sticks, right? Not really. Well, ICO has some stick, Ofcom has some stick, but not really. We need to address more dimensions of, dimensions, wow, interesting. It's all about me. Dimensions of responsible AI. So, you know, what about sustainability? What about, you know, privacy and security, all of these other things that I haven't talked about, which we should talk about and bring much more to the fore. So we need better frameworks, we need better tools. So, you know, if you're in designing tools for getting something done, that is really needed because we don't really have them. And particularly, I think, for people who are not AI experts. So we need more involvement by people affected by that technology. And I'm starting to use technology now rather than AI. I think that holds true whether you're building, you know, new VR systems for particular cases, right? We need actually the input by people. And again, I think what is true for AI is really true for a lot of other technology. Whether they have AI in them a little bit or not, I think we, you know, a lot of the points that I talked about are really still applicable to everyone in this room. And with that, I'm going to stop talking.